8, 1988, at the British Academy of Film and Television, Rupert Murdoch emerged on stage in a cloud of dry ice, accompanied by Carl Orff's O Fortuna. Behind him, a wall of screens depicted a rocket launching into space. All this pomp and pageantry was in service of one of the most significant announcements in British broadcasting history. Murdoch's News International empire was moving into the satellite business. They were launching a 4-channel service that was to be called Sky Television, broadcasting on the independent commercial satellite network Astra, which in turn was run by a private company incorporated in Luxembourg. And they'd be on screen, he promised, inside a year. Over at BSB, the initial public response was a theatrical shrug. Astra was far technologically inferior to their system. They'd be broadcasting on shoddy old PAL, rather than BSB's crispy high-def DMAG. On top of that, what did any of these corporate types know about programming? What are they going to put on there? Repeats and American imports? Who's going to shell out for a satellite dish just to watch that? No, BSB reassured their investors they had nothing to worry about. But behind the scenes, they knew better. Just over a year from the planned launch of the BSB network, the movement was already starting to fall apart.
The news from ITN.
The first major setback arrived shortly after ASG did. One of the preconditions for winning the franchise was the provision of a decent news service. To this end, BSB had joined forces with ITN during the bidding process itself. Doing so would probably help them win the competition. However, ITN were never full partners in the BSB consortium. It was more of an understanding in principle that ITN would be the news agency that BSB would be using for their current affairs coverage. The exact shape of this coverage was naturally undecided as of yet, and when BSB and ITN sat down to discuss it, a massive gulf was immediately apparent between the two companies' ideas of what BSB's news coverage should be.
Hello, good evening.
BSB had assumed they'd have a deal comparable to that of Channel 4, whose news was, and remains to this day, produced by ITN. But Channel 4 news amounted to barely more than a single programme. BSB, being at this stage 4 channels in 3, and with a plan to have regular news bulletins on all of them, even the children's channel and the movie channel, would naturally need to be a bigger undertaking. And when it came down to brass tacks, ITN demonstrated surprisingly little appetite for it. While BSB thought they were a big deal, the next step in British broadcasting and that, ITN thought this whole thing was as passing a fad as breakfast television, from which ITN had also kept their noses out. The deal they offered BSB stipulated that ITN retain full editorial control, and worse still, BSB would have to wait 24 hours before they could use some of the juiciest footage, so that he could play exclusively on the news at 10 first. Oh, and they also charged through the nose for the privilege. The unavoidable implication was that, as far as ITN were concerned, BSB wasn't real television. Despite the lofty idea of a rolling news channel, BSB in ITN's eyes were a kindergarten class, compared to the veteran 30-year-old organisation who could reasonably claim to have invented modern television news programming, at least in Britain. They were the first to have newscasters you could see. They were the first to have packaged reports written and delivered by journalists in the field. And in Robin Day, they had the very first reporter to actually ask politicians searching questions, or indeed questions at all. ITN felt like they had the patent on television news and they could decide how everyone else used it, BBC notwithstanding. Unsurprisingly, ASG disagreed. The 24-hour delay on certain footage seemed a funny idea of up-to-the-minute news coverage to him, and for his company to have no editorial control over it either was just the peanut buttery filling of the sandwich ITN were trying to force-feed him and his company. Eventually the IBA got involved and told ITN to cede editorial control to BSB, make use of their studios once they had some instead of ITN HQ, and drop the price somewhere closer to reasonability while you're at it. At which ITN started fidgeting about and complaining about the effort this was going to take. After several months of going nowhere fast, ASG went to the IBA and told them it wasn't going to work out. Sic transit ITN. This was obviously a blow, but it was downplayed at the time. The marketing bods hadn't detected much appetite for satellite television as a platform for the news, and there was a particular discrepancy between the public appetite for the news and the amount it would cost BSB to make the news, which was a hell of a lot no matter who they hired. But it was still a blow, and ultimately would prove quite a heavy one. And it wasn't even the first. Because on that day, in June 1988, at the announcement of the Sky-Astra alliance, sitting at Rupert Murdoch's side was what appeared to be a honey badger in a Jew fro, but was actually one of Britain's hottest entrepreneurs, and one who until relatively recently had been a part of the BSB consortium. Alan Sugar had defected to the other side. Amstrad were going to work for the opposition, an opposition that BSB weren't even supposed to have at all. But it's a big, big sky, and SES, the company behind the Astra network, understood that when, backed financially by the Luxembourg government, but not beholden to them, they launched the very first privately run satellite network, covering much of Europe including all of Britain, and invited interested companies to bid for their use. Murdoch, having failed to capture the IBA franchise, leapt at his chance for what seemed to him an even better deal, because Astra, and transmissions beamed therefrom, were outside the jurisdiction of any British regulatory body, and those words were catnip to Murdoch. Astra had given him a platform to do everything BSB were going to do without the restraints. No IBA, no public service remit, no remit at all. Pirate television, albeit with a letter of marque from Luxembourg. Most importantly, no DMAC. Sky was going to broadcast on old-fashioned PAL. At the press conference, Murdoch and Sugar took turns denigrating DMAC. Sugar in particular had made a career out of selling cheap electronics with lots of flashing lights and go faster stripes to cover up the surprising lack of outlay on both sides.
Is the Amstrad double-decker, just £399.
He had little time for flash kits like DMAC, when PAL worked perfectly well, or at all, and cost orders of magnitude less. Once again, BSB's inner circle appealed for calm. The Astra satellites, they pointed out, were nowhere near as powerful as theirs were going to be, as evidenced by the mere fact that they were transmitting on PAL, which for all they knew may not even have survived the journey into space and back. I mean, sure, they were still having a nightmare getting the DMAX system ready, a nightmare that was starting to approach Hieronymus Bosch proportions at that. But once the bastard was done, which it absolutely definitely would be by mid-1989, definitely, it would provide British viewers with the greatest picture quality they'd ever seen. Never mind what Alan Sugar's saying about it being a load of rubbish using a bunch of redundant parts. What does he know, sweet Jesus, let this damn thing hold together? They knew they were in trouble. They'd been aware of the impending launch of Astra, but that was some European thing. They never in a million years expected someone to use it to broadcast to Britain. BSB was supposed to be a monopoly. That had been the idea. They'd been working under the impression that they would stay a monopoly. They were taking their time over DMAC because they thought to an extent they could afford to. But no one has jurisdiction over the sky, just the ground you launch from. Murdoch realised that. He realised it was all up for grabs. And he provided BSB with something they never thought they'd have. Direct competition. Suddenly, BSB needed to move forward extremely pronto. And to their horror, they realised they had an underpants gnome plan.
I don't get it.
Which for grown-ups means it included a starting point and an ending point. But they were yet to figure out the connecting middle bit.
Oh, I get it. No, you don't, fat ass.
With Sky gearing up to launch in February of 1989, BSB were already running out of time. First priority, remind the nation they existed, with their own overblown press launch of something or other. The technology seemed to be the best angle for these purposes, as BSB's superiority in this area was undeniable, unless you're Alan Sugar. Equally undeniable was the fact that the technology wasn't bloody ready, at least not for full deployment. However, they could knock up a quick demonstration of DMAX picture quality at IBA and hopefully steal a few column inches back from Sky and Astra in the process. Maybe wave a model receiver dish at the press and see if that impresses them. One of the few strokes of good luck that BSB ever had, frankly this is pushing it, came while planning for the IBA demo, when an inventor named John Collins, chief of minuscule Scottish technology firm Fortel, phoned them up out of the blue and explained that he'd been working on an interesting new version of a television aerial, and he thought they might be interested. Naturally, in the absence of anything else to provide BSB with an image of its own, the response from the management trio was gimme, gimme, give it! Despite the fact that it was even less ready than DMAC, being only slightly more than a twinkle in Collins' eye. But they were able to knock out a model on the quick-fast by cutting a bit of wood into shape and painting it. And to everyone's great surprise, it turned out to be the big success story of the demonstration, because it was so small and white, and most unusually of all, it was square. The press was so amazed at this futuristic construction they didn't even notice that this was just a chunk of wood and there was no such thing as a functioning squareal, as they were calling it, as yet. It was a small thing, literally, but it was exactly what BSB needed. Something genuinely iconic to build an identity around. Because Murdoch had a head start on them in that respect as well. Not that the Sky name and logo were iconic, yet, but with Murdoch owning half of the country's press and the other half stumbling to catch up with him, it didn't need to be. Murdoch at this point owned 5 newspapers. The Times and its breeze block-sized Sunday sibling, the now forgotten Today, a mid-market tabloid that never really caught on, and of course, The Sun and the News of the World.
You've got a lot of pride, you're loyal, and you're funny side, you're pops
very much at the height of the Kelvin Mackenzie golden age of scum. Between them, the majority of the newspaper reading public was gawping in their direction, and so began an age of undisguised advertorials gushing about how great Sky will be, how cheap, how entertaining, how just completely brilliant Rupert Murdoch is in all things.
Jameson here with an amazing television offer only in the news of the world. Satellite TV systems for under £100, giving you 8 new channels.
Starring the Entertainment Channel, game shows, super soaps, family favourites, a 24-hour news channel, 2 all-action sports channels, a children's channel, a women's lifestyle channel, a music channel, and the movie channel. Top name stars, explosive action, unbeatable big-screen entertainment. Sensational! 8 new channels.
Get satellite TV at half the recommended retail price, only in the news of the world this Sunday.
One thing you can say about him, he knows not to go to war without an army. Not that he gave BSB any choice in the matter.
Sun underwear sale with prices so low, it's dangerous. You can wake the beast in any man. Get this sheer overnight sensation, this saucy little bedsuit, and snap out this bikini suspender and garter set. The Sun's the one that's got it all. Get it all and drive him wild. Pop into your paper shop and order The Sun.